All right, good morning, everybody. Last week, as we began these licensing hearings, each commissioner made a presentation regarding the section of the application to which he or she had been assigned, and we're here now to collaborate on the presentations we've made and all the information we've accumulated over the period of time that we've been dealing with these applications and with the information given to us by the applicants. We're very grateful to the Boston Teachers Union for allowing us to use the hall here today. This is a busy week in Boston. Virtually every convention center and meeting room is being occupied. That's good for the economy. And we're very grateful that we were able to find this good facility here through the great good will and graciousness of the Teachers Union. As I mentioned several times during the course of the proceedings last week, our presentations were not preliminary score sheets. Each was instead an analysis by one commissioner of the application and the section of the application for which he or she was responsible, the conditions the commissioner recommended in light of those facts, and his or her analysis of what those facts revealed. Nevertheless, preliminary scorekeeping is inevitable, and it occurred with perhaps predictable results. But last week's proceedings involved individual views and assessments, not the commissioners. And fortunately, the commission has before it two competitive applications, and the process of making those collaborative judgments begins today. We're going to start with a brief discussion of the responses we received last week to the conditions which we asked the applicants to respond to. We'll then ask General Counsel Blue to provide a brief outline of the legal framework within which we're operating, primarily so that all who are watching from afar will understand that framework. Then we'll turn our collaborative attention to the overview section of the application. For those of you who followed the proceedings last week will remember that we each presented our views of a section of that overview presentation, but did not come to an overall rating, and we'll do that this morning. We'll then begin with substantive discussions of the applications and proceed until we reach a decision. Consistent with the approach, I should say, that we took last week, there'll be no press availability from this point forward until we reach a decision. Elaine Driscoll, our Public Information Officer, whose contact information you have, will be available to answer questions as we proceed. Elaine needs no introduction, but there she is here in the front row, for those of you who don't know her. I should say that we are streaming today from a hot point, and because of bandwidth issues, the stream is not available on iPhones or iPads. It is, however, fully available on our website, as it has been throughout these proceedings. Any other preliminary remarks a commissioner would like to make? Then let me begin, and we're going to go with respect to this sort of high-level review of the conditions in the order that we received, that we engaged in the presentations. And so I'll go first. I had one condition for Mohegan Sun, essentially that it submit for the Commission's approval the materials that it was choosing to use in construction of the facility, having in mind the importance of the various elements of it and the care with which they needed to be installed and the choice of design materials. And we wanted to be kept informed of that and have an opportunity to look at those before they were actually installed. And Mohegan Sun agreed to that condition. For the WIN proposal, I had proposed to the other commissioners that we ask for a response on two conditions. One, that they rethink a design of the building and submit it to us, not a command that we have a design review, but that they rethink the design and submit it to us for analysis and to the public so that they could take a look at it. And also that they allow us to give us an opportunity to approve the materials that we were going to use. And I, particularly in my presentation, concentrated on a material known as EFIS. We got in response to that assertion and description, thoughtful description. And by the way, All of these responses are now available on the web. They were posted as we started this morning. So you can see for yourselves what the responses were. We got a response about the good qualities of the EFS material and no agreement to submit materials to us for our approval prior to their implementation, and no response at all really to the request that we that they give thought to a redesign and think about a redesign that we could take a look at. There was also a reference in the response to the AIA criticism of the building. The AIA, as I took pains to make clear when I gave the presentation, was not the Commission's response. That was an outside body that took a look at it, and I mentioned that I was troubled by the unfortunate language that they had used to characterize some of their findings. But in the response, there's a statement that basically the AIA thought we should conform more to the neighborhood. This suggestion adds a note of humor to the moment. Perhaps we should have adopted the shape of a fuel storage tank or a big box retailer, notably the surrounding structures of the neighborhood. Well, I'm not sure that that was an opportunity for a moment of humor. The point that I made in the presentation, and part of the request for a thought about redesign, was the conformity of and utility of and energy of the building in its context. Part of that context, as I also mentioned, is that when one approaches the city from the north down Route 93, there is a rather dramatic first glance of the city around Medford as you see it emerge through the trees, the city of Boston and the metropolitan area. And then the next thing you see is the towers and the windmill, and if the license is awarded to win, this building. So this will be a gateway building that leads to the city, and that is what I was trying to get at when I made my presentation and when I made that request for response to the proposed condition. There's one other feature of the response that I'm going to take because no commissioner was responsible for it, and that is that there is a change in the definition of effective date of the license. The effective date of the license, and this is really the same as the effective date of the license that we issued to MGM in Springfield. The effective date of the license is 3 days after, would be 3 days after the voters reject the third ballot question on the November ballot. If they do, they may not, and then, of course, the consequences are obvious. But if they do, 3 days after that, the license becomes effective. And the response to that condition, which is a boilerplate condition, was that the effective date would be changed if the license were issued to win to 3 days after the certification of a no vote on question 3, or the date when the Department of Revenue issued a directive saying that the 6% tax, withholding tax, not a 6% holding tax, that the holding tax on the $600 wins would not be applicable to table games. The win applicant and the other applicants have made that proposal to us. There's a provision in the current statute that if anybody wins over $600, a withholding has to be withdrawn from the winnings before they're paid. And that, in our view, as well as in the applicant's view, has a important downside effect on the flow, particularly of table games. That's not what's done under the federal statute. That's not what's done under the standards in place in other states. And we've recommended to the legislature that they change that, and will continue to do so. But the WIN response said that the license would not become, if they were granted the license, effective until the legislature made that change, or the DOR, the Department of Revenue, said it was inapplicable to table games. I'll have more to say about that later, but those were the responses on which I wanted to touch. Next was Commissioner Zuniga in the presentation, so if you'd make your analysis, that would be great.
Thank you. My section had conditions to the Mohegan Sun applicant, and I'll take them in the order that I made them. I discussed the notion of additional equity from the structure, from the financing structure. And I specifically asked for $100 million more in equity available to begin construction, given the cash that, in my estimation, would be needed at that time. The applicant responded in a couple of different, with an aspect that I believe ultimately addresses the concerns I had. But I should clarify, additional equity does not mean additional capital investment. It just changes the nature of where the money is coming from. Ultimately, the investment amount remains the same, just for those who might not appreciate the difference between the debt and equity or capital structure. The applicant does propose to change their capital structure in the following manner. They would have $50 million more to come in the form of common equity, which is what I characterize to be the equity that gets paid last, which is what, in my view, gives a lot of confidence relative to the long-term view of the investment. They propose to have another $50 million of preferred equity, the one that was characterized during my presentation as behaving somewhat like a loan or like debt, because it had a stipulated sum and it had a term that that for one was much smaller than the term of a license. You might remember the term of that preferred equity is 10 years with call-in rights after 5 years. The applicant, in my view, to address some of those concerns, proposes that that second $50 million of preferred equity would be the same, but now has a stipulated rate of 12% as opposed to 15%. And this is true for all of the equity that they would have. That's on top of the $60 million preferred equity that was originally put forward. And importantly, to address one of the comments that we made relative to the position that the applicant could find itself in, controlling 60% of the board that would effectuate the callability of that preferred debt, the applicant has proposed that when it came to that decision, the board members appointed by Brigade would not vote into calling that debt, the new preferred debt. It would only be up to the remaining board members to analyze and decide whether calling that, paying off that debt, now at 12%, would be more beneficial to the project than, say, continuing to hold to that debt. In addition, the applicant states in the response that $50 million of additional equity would come in the form of equity guarantee. Now, that on its face value looks like the condition has been improved, but I would argue, and I will, that the guarantee already existed in the form of the multiple backstop that Brigade provided for a number of different funding or debt situations. You'll remember that the applicant proposes to lease all of their equipment, and in case of cost overruns there, Brigade would backstop that. There was a similar situation with the third-party hotel funding. If there were cost overruns, say on the hotel constructions dollars or the amount that others like New England Development and Finard would have to bring in, and they couldn't, Brigade would again backstop that. So they have put forward a general guarantee here that I would argue is equivalent to the backstop situation that they had before. So although I was looking for the 100 million more to come in the form of common equity, I do recognize that the preferred equity has been stipulated interest has been reduced, and perhaps more importantly, the callability of that preferred equity has been put on the board members that would only that are not the ones from Brigade. So overall, that's an improvement to the capital structure. I would say that the structure, although not the same in terms of the condition, does satisfy the intent of the condition that I brought forward. I can pause there to answer questions. I know I got into a couple of technical terms without the help of any visuals, but would you like me to continue?
Any questions from any of the commissioners? I do have a question, but I'm going to save it till later when we get into more substantive discussions.
Okay. Okay. Next, I would address the notion of the marketing restriction. The marketing restriction, I will repeat, as I said last when I was putting this condition. This is a notion that the applicant provided as originally to the commission. My intention in putting a condition on this area was emanated from how could this really work, and how does it reconcile with the way that the market that we view the market opportunity is for this area. The marketing restriction, you might remember, was limited to an area of zip codes in and around Greater Boston. The condition, as presented, extended the market area to all of the New England states that we see the market for Region A extending to, notably New Hampshire, all of Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. The applicant has responded that they would be willing to extend that marketing restriction to Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire, like we asked. They included now Maine, which we didn't, but they have carved out Connecticut out of the marketing restriction. They also propose that additional locations or additional promotions may be offered to customers regarding of the location, including New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and I believe that's it. All of those properties that also having that the applicant is able to draw from those states, all of those promotions would be offered to all of those customers in an equal basis. You could redeem promotions in Pocono Downs, for example, or Connecticut or Massachusetts. So in a way, they are extending a little bit that market notion of equal market too, and by including those other states. I will read some of the comments I had from our consultants on this piece, although Connecticut was excluded from the amended specified zone, Mohegan Sun, Massachusetts has proposed that any gaming promotion offered to any current or future tribe gaming operations, Mohegan tribe gaming operations, to any customers regardless of the location could be redeemed at Mohegan Sun, Massachusetts. This provision provides that customers in Connecticut cannot be offered promotions greater than that which are redeemable at Mohegan Sun, Massachusetts. So although Mohegan Sun has modified this condition, the modifications are consistent with the intent of the marketing restriction of the condition as put forward to the applicant. Again, with the carve-out of Connecticut, but at least in exchange of that with additional states. I can also pose traded Maine for Connecticut. Right. I could argue they're different markets, but I understand their flagship operation is in Connecticut, and they and I can understand why they do this. Now, they also have advanced the notion of giving the commission approval rights over that marketing restriction standards and procedures. One that you'll remember, Commissioner, you were not interested in going down that path, perhaps from a ideology standpoint. Philosophy. I, on the other hand, thought that it was important to have the commission, or this commission, or a future commission, have the ability to really understand how an audit, how that is being applied. So that, in my view, is something that they have advanced that furthers the intent that I had in putting that condition forward. I can also pause there if there's any questions for this.
Questions?
No.
Again, I may have some later. I want to discuss, and I think we all do, these conditions in the context of overall deliberations, but I don't have any questions at the moment.
Okay. Third, and I think third and last, the applicant has advanced an additional condition, not one that we proposed, but they termed this an additional condition that they call this an applicant proposed condition. Brigade will fully divest all of its holdings in Mohegan Tribal Gaming Authority debt securities by the opening date. This is a self-imposed condition, as I mentioned. One that I would argue, given the acceptance of the marketing plan condition that I just spoke about, the divestiture of Brigade from Connecticut, I, in my opinion, would be indifferent to. I know what they're putting it forward. We made in the presentation the comment that because Brigade has interests in both Connecticut and Massachusetts, that there would be a potential for, if they were to leave or exit their interest in, say, Massachusetts, whether the interest of Massachusetts would be protected, or the interest of the Commonwealth. Since we have addressed it, in my view, with, or at least in some way, with the marketing restriction, the divestiture, in my mind, is not a significant thing. But if they're willing to do that, that's their prerogative. I can also answer questions on that. Or
well, I don't have any questions. And again, we're going to get into the impact of the condition responses later in the discussion, but I take a different view of that divestiture offer. And we can talk about that when we get into things later.
Yep.
Again, these are simply the recitations by one commissioner. We haven't started the deliberations yet, but I did want to put that one on the table.
That was my summary, unless somebody had any other comments or questions.
Okay, any other comments, questions? All right, let's turn then to Commissioner Cameron for a summary of the responses to the mitigation. And remember that some of these responses are highly technical and really require close reading, and we're trying simply to get a high-level response to the content as we see it. But as the deliberations proceed, we'll get into more detail, and the conditions themselves are posted on the website. Commissioner Cameron?
Thank you, Commissioner. So I'll just try to summarize the condition that we proposed and the response that we received. The first part of our condition had to do with the best and final that
This
Wynn
was a
had
win, yeah.
that Wynn had originally proposed, and that's the BAFO as referred to it, that is the best and final. The major differences in our, what we did is take that original BAFO and say that this will apply. In our response, there were some changes made to that BAFO. The first being the upfront payment was a combination, it was $1 million upfront. It was a combination of $750 upfront payment, those were public safety needs, and then a $250,000 payment for traffic improvements. That $1 million in this response was increased to, it was increased by $1.75 million. And so that $1 million piece is now $2.7 million increase. And there's some specificity there for $1.5 million to be dedicated to Sullivan Square over the long term. So that's the first difference in our condition as opposed to the response. And then with regard to annual payments, the original BAFO included annual payments of $1.6 million for other mitigation. That could be public safety, water, transportation, and $1 million for transportation. That now has been increased, so that's a combination $2.6 million. Those would have been annual payments. That has been increased to $3.6 million in annual payments. And that would be 1.5 to Sullivan Square and 2.1 for other, meaning other mitigation, water, public safety, and transportation could be included there as well. So if we add those numbers up, we're looking at the original Wynn best and final had a total of about $46 million in payments, and this new proposed offer is now $63 million. So, and a minimum of $30 million to Sullivan Square, and that could go up depending on how much of those other payments were dedicated to Sullivan Square. So that's the best and final. If we move on to the specifics of our condition, the next area we had long-term solution and short-term solution pieces of this condition, and much of this was stripped or Wynn did not agree to many of these conditions. The first piece of that, if you recall, we had said that Wynn is to complete the MEPA process and receive permits for short-term mitigation at Sullivan Square by July 1 of 2015. Again, we did not want this to be a situation that dragged on for a long, long time. And the response was the permit application. They would get a permit application back to us within 90 days. The second piece of that condition was the other side of Sullivan Square. We're talking about Main Street and Rutherford Ave. We had, in our conditions, said that other side would be mitigated regardless of whether MIPA required such mitigation, provided that the City of Boston requires the mitigation. This was not agreed to, and the implication was that the additional monies that were proposed as part of the BAFO that I just explained could be used to cover those improvements if needed. And another piece of the condition was for WIN to develop and update a plan to improve public safety vehicle access. Again, this was not agreed to. More money in the original BAFO would cover that as well, and those communities would use their own judgment. Certainly that WIN would comply with the stated goals for alternative modes of transportation. That's the 29% we spoke of last week. That is part of the MIPA filing, so that is will have to be done as per MIPA. And the last piece here would be our ability to enforce some of these conditions through measures as reducing the use of parking spaces in the on-site garage, variable pricing, and this was not agreed to. WIN believes they can better manage their facility. Continuing on with some of our specific plans with regard to transportation, reduction in a transportation vehicle trips. We had originally talked about 10% of the cost of long-term going to the long-term redesign. That was not agreed to. The 10%, and we got those numbers. We explained how we got those numbers. Again, it's the Friday peak, but that was not agreed to. There would have been a cap. Again, none of that was agreed to. Then the additional transportation management reduction in vehicles portion, the 20,000 vehicles over the example would have been if they exceeded by 200 vehicles, it would have been an additional $4 million. None of those proposed pieces of the condition were agreed to. The WIN team looking for more certainty, and they certainly are more comfortable with specifics. The last piece here was that WIN may petition the condition to refund any unused funds in the long-term solution, if not commenced within 10 years. The response we had in return was pretty much a 7-year. So it's a change in the starting point of that condition, which really would bring that down to 7 years. We had a parking condition that was not agreed to, and that would have been a report. With regard to site cleanup, WIN has said that if it's part of a public process, they would comply. We had a little more generic here that we thought that was really important to participate in a public process. And a look-back study was the final piece of our condition, and that was after construction, after 1 year of operation, and after 5 years, and that was not agreed to in the response from WIN. And that's just a general outline of the condition that we put forth and the response, which was considerably different.
All right, questions?
Can I ask on the overall numbers how we get to the 46 and the 63 million? Or could that be
Can I make
later?
a suggestion that,
Okay.
that we hold that, because the transition between the BAFO and the proposal that was put forward in response is a little complicated, and I would like to have some help in creating a spreadsheet of some kind so that we could put that up on the board and make sure that we all understand
Okay.
what it is. Because it is complicated, and a number of different strands tie into each other.
Yep.
And I think we need to unravel that. So if you don't mind, I'd like to hold that until
That's fine.
until we can all get there. Other questions? comments? I have one to make, and that concerns an error in, or a disconnect between the condition to which we asked Wynn to respond and the one that was presented in our presentation. In our presentation, in Commissioner Cameron's presentation, there was a proposed condition that the Wynn team obtain the permits needed for Sullivan Square short-term improvements by July 1, 2015. She and I both communicated with staff as the more technical conditions were being prepared for delivery to the applicants. And I guess I was imprecise because that condition wound up as all permits necessary for everything be obtained by July 1, 2015. Apparently I was imprecise in communicating what that condition was, but it was simply intended to be simply a condition that the permits for the Sullivan Square short-term improvements be obtained by July 1, 2015. And that was so, as Commissioner Cameron just said, this did not drag on forever. That's a big concern that I think many of us have. There is also, in the formal set of conditions that went to both applicants, went to the Wynn applicant, a statement that if that isn't complied with, the license would be revoked. Well, that's nothing new. These are license conditions, every one of them. So if there is not compliance with a license condition, then the commission has the power to revoke the license. So that piece was not different from what at least was implied in the presentations. But the other piece was a product, I gather, of my miscommunication. All right. Anything to say about that? Okay. Commissioner Stebbins?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll start with the proposed license conditions on Mohegan Sun, Massachusetts, and their replies and comments. The first one was with respect to their loyalty card program. We had asked that they provide us annual data about how the points are redeemed, the success of the program, the companies that are participating in it. Mohegan Sun replied, the license condition is reasonable. Excuse me. They also wanted to make a slight adjustment and a reference that for the first year of the program that they estimated the amount to be spent offsite at participating Momentum Loyalty Program businesses was going to be $17 million. The next item was with respect to surrounding community agreements and vendor purchases. Again, we had pointed out that we thought some of the numbers being committed to in both surrounding community agreements and a projected local spend did not align. We asked that Mohegan Sun, Massachusetts provide obviously a blanket good commitment to reach those goals, but asked that they just make sure that the reason for what could be considered a misalignment of the funds be communicated not only to MGC but also to the communities that had signed surrounding community agreements, and they accepted that condition as proposed. The next condition was with respect to notification of selection of a general contractor. Obviously, we are anxious and focused on making sure that commitments for MBE, WB, and VBE's participation in construction and design are met. This is, was a similar condition that we provided to MGM with respect to their project, and that the general condition is for whoever the general contractor is and Mohegan Sun, Massachusetts meet with the commission to talk about those commitments. And Mohegan Sun, Massachusetts accepted the condition as proposed. Mohegan Sun, Massachusetts, similar to Commissioner Zuniga's license condition, also proposed a condition. That is within 30 days of designation as the Region A licensee, MSM, and what they propose, an independent consultant chosen by the commission will prepare and review a domestic and international marketing plan. and also give us authority to approve such plan as a condition of license. As you know, we also have asked our other licensees to provide us with a kind of a tourism marketing plan, I believe within 60 days of when they open. What Mohegan Sun, Massachusetts is suggesting is something a little more thoughtful, talking more to marketing both domestic and international visitors, and certainly saw through our comments that this was a priority. So I think there's an opportunity to explore this condition further, maybe in our deliberations, and talk about how it might tie into existing license conditions. But they offered that up to us as kind of their proposed conditional licensing. Turning to Wynn, Massachusetts, they had 3 license conditions to respond to. The first was with respect to economic development. We asked them to consider a license condition to hire no less than 75% of their project employees from within 30 minutes of Everett, as they had communicated during the June 25th host community hearing. They came back and suggested that we edit that slightly and say Wynn will use good faith efforts to hire no less than 75% of the project employees from within 30 minutes. Their proposed amendment is somewhat consistent with the written response they provided to us at that host community hearing, and certainly seems consistent with surrounding community agreements that they've signed. Hiring preference, we talked about Wynn offering a hiring preference to qualified Suffolk Downs employees in the event that Suffolk Downs closes upon the award of a license. This is to ensure some consistencies with the statements again at the Everett host community hearing. As we went back and saw, there certainly is a related provision to this in the Act, not our statute, but in the Act, about permanently employed Suffolk Downs employees. And I'd like to also talk about this condition a little bit further when we get to our deliberations, but certainly accepting that condition as proposed. And the third license condition that was suggested was asking Wynn, Massachusetts to commit to provide medical and dental benefits to unionized and non-unionized employees at the project, at least commensurate with the benefit programs offered by Wynn's Nevada gaming facilities. Wynn responded that they'd like some flexibility to operate the project as is necessary to maximize both the interests of the Commonwealth as well as to Wynn shareholders, employees. They suggested adopting language saying, consistent with its best practices, will commit to provide its employees with competitive medical and dental benefits that are commensurate also with those provided in the region. That was their response to that third condition. That's it.
All right, any questions about any of those? Well, each of those responses, of course, speaks for itself. They're posted on the website. We got them all by the deadline of 5 o'clock on Friday. We looked at them over the weekend. We'll continue to look at them. And they will play a role in the discussions that will begin when we begin the substantive deliberations. So though we don't have questions and discussion about them now, we will no doubt have as we proceed. Now, though, I would like to proceed to the second item on the agenda, which is to hear from General Counsel Blue about the broad legal framework under which we're operating. Primarily, this isn't the first time we've heard this, but primarily for the benefit of those who may be watching from afar. General Counsel Blue.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning. Morning.
I would like to call your attention to a few legal matters before you start today. First of all, Chapter 23K includes a list of certain findings that you will need to make as you go through your deliberations. I know you are well familiar with these findings since you've done them for the Category 2s and the Category 1 Region B application. The commission also, on a higher level, the commission may also issue just one Category 1 license in each region. Today, we are considering the grant of a license in Region A. If the commission is not convinced that an applicant has met the eligibility criteria and provided convincing evidence, no Category 1 license may be issued. The commission has full discretion as to whether or not to issue a license. Applicants have no legal right or privilege to a license, and the period of the license is 15 years and begins when the commission approves the opening of the gaming establishment for operation. The commission's proceedings, which began with the submission of the RFA2 application, are administrative and legislative in nature. They are not adjudicatory. The applicant has been required to present all of the information required by the commission. The RFA2 administrative proceedings have involved public hearings. They have not been adversarial in nature. They have involved no specific charges, legal rights, or privileges. They have provided no opportunity for cross-examination of witnesses under oath. They've afforded the opportunity for public comment, including unsworn statements and letters of support, opposition, or concern by persons advocating for or against the application. This proceeding will involve a final decision to grant or deny a gaming license, and that rests at all times within the discretion of the commission. The commission will ultimately grant or deny the applications before it. As was in the case in the commission's Region B decisions, the commission will enter into an agreement to award a license with the successful applicant in substantially the same form used as Region B. The form of the ultimate license will be a decisional form similar to that used for the issuance of the Category 2 license, and will include a statement of findings as to how the applicant proposes to advance the objectives in Chapter 23K. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Now, in the past, in each of the prior occasions, we have made the licensing decision. We've made it contingent on acceptance of the conditions. We have voted to award the license, and then we've come back and signed in public the formal agreement, if you will, to issue a license. And then we have followed that with, after that agreement is signed, with the formal license, which includes the findings that the statute requires. Those findings take some time to write out, and we don't want to keep everybody here in the room 2 or 3 days while we do that. Is that the process you envision that we would follow in this instance?
Yes, that is correct.
So we'll make a decision, sign the agreement, and then the findings and formalities will follow that. All right. Any questions from anybody?
No.
Okay. Thank you very much, General Counsel Blue. All right, let's go on to the next item of the agenda, which is a return to the overview section of the presentations. Melissa, could we get that section of the presentations up so everybody can follow what we're doing? Again, for those who were not present last week, we each made presentations. Each commissioner had been assigned to one of the 5 areas of the application to analyze, work with a team, and then make a report to the other commissioners about. In the past, we've had 5 commissioners, and this was Commissioner Crosby's section, the overview section. Commissioner Crosby recused himself, as everyone by now knows, and so each of us we divided this up among us all, and we all took a piece of it, but because we can only reach collaborative conclusions in a public session, we were unable to reach an overall rating for this section. So we'll now begin to come back and go through it and come to an overall rating. And why don't we, just to make sure that we're all on the same page here, go through it one question at a time in the order of the questions this time, unless you've got it up another way. Melissa, do you have it in the presentation way?
I have it in the way that you presented it.
Okay, so my 2 questions would be first. All right. So there are 9 questions. We presented them in the order that we made the initial presentation, so they're not in the numerical order, but that's irrelevant. So I thought we'd go first, go through the conditions, take any questions that anybody has, and then see if the individual ratings needed any adjustment, and then at the end make some judgments about the overall rating. So condition, let me just get it up here.
Question 3, I believe.
Yes.
Question 2.
yeah.
2.
Question 2, that's right. But I'm just trying to get the presentation here. Everybody else is way ahead of me, I'm sure. Question 2 has to do with destination resorts. And the question is, some visionaries in the gaming business describe an evolution of gaming facilities from convenience casinos to destination resorts to city integrated resorts. Explain what, if any, meaning city integrated resort has to you and how you anticipate following its principles if in fact you subscribe to them. Additionally, please explain how the project you propose embraces the legislature's mandate to present destination resort casinos rather than convenience casinos. And I gave my response there. I gave the reasons for the response, and I rated Mohegan Sun sufficient and Wynn in Everett outstanding. Based on the response to the condition with respect to marketing, would like to revisit the sufficiency for the Mohegan Sun condition. When I made that suggested rating, I was focusing primarily on the reports dealing with the zip code restrictions, the assessment that a very small percentage of the income they were targeting would come from overnight or more than an hour away visitors. And it seemed to me that in that context, the Mohegan Sun Resort was really one, as I said in the rating, one of a number of attractions in a city rather than a destination that would lure people in to look at a variety of things while they were here. The revised marketing plan, and I went back and read, since I made that presentation, the original marketing plan, which when read in the context of the PKG, or PKF assessment is ambiguous, because that original marketing plan did have a great deal to say about pulling people in from afar, but the more specific figures were based on the PKF marketing plan, which was disavowed and then re-embraced. There was some ambiguity, but the revised marketing plan in response to the conditions, coupled with commission oversight, leads me to believe that that rating should be upgraded to very good if we accept the proposition that that's what's going to happen. So I'd propose to do that, but I'd welcome some discussion. That's simply some thoughts that I've had since I made the presentation.
I agree. In fact, I was going to point out that I thought the proposal was better than sufficient as I understood it from the beginning. So I would agree with your reassessing this, and as it stands now, it's a very good proposal.
So you disagreed with it from the get-go?
I did.
Yeah, it was
I did.
amplified. Yeah, all right.
The Mohegan Sun applicant, however, still depends on the region, the New England region, to drive its business, not just from their projections. I think or the marketing restriction, I think it does help in that regard. I think it puts everybody in equal footing at some level. But I believe it's still the case that the applicant, that Mohegan relies a lot more, certainly a lot more on the local market, whether that includes now Rhode Island and New Hampshire. Rhode Island more than anybody else, because New Hampshire was included. Whereas you'll remember from my section, wind has projects less from the local market and a lot more from the outside market. That would easily explain the difference if you're suggesting this would be still a very good and outstanding, and we could leave it there. But through its market, the view of the market, what we view as their go-to-market strategy, I think there's a real difference, because one is really attempting to go internationally to the high end and to places outside of even the region.
Well, I hope we can discuss that, and I know we will discuss that more as we proceed. But I did not mean to suggest that there is an equivalency between the two. I simply meant that it seemed to me that both reading the original proposal and then looking at the sort of fortified original proposal with the response to the condition warranted an upgrade. I'll stop there.
I also would not disagree with your interest in changing that rating. You know, I always looked at this question talking about a city integrated resort. I think we're all mindful of the old stereotype, which is just draw them in and don't let them leave until they've lost every dime, and then, you know, send them on their way. I think in my presentation also we credit, you know, Mohegan with doing a lot of aggressive outreach to businesses in the immediate area. They've talked about a strategy to draw people to Revere Beach. They talked about a strategy to pull you know, people up along the North Shore to Gloucester and Lynn and Salem and other communities. So I credit with them with that. I think that to me you know, defines more of a city integrated resort. You know, there's certainly plain evidence that they are not just trying to have you experience their building and then find a way home. You know, the second half of the question, you know, is your plan a destination resort casino rather than a convenience casino? I think that line starts to get a little blurry when we think about where their market draw is coming from and where they expect their patron base to come from. But certainly with the concept of the city integrated resort, I think they've been pretty aggressive in trying to, again, push customers back outside the door through transportation means, through the proposed reward program, and again, it's part of their strategy to have people kind of explore not just Revere and Revere Beach, but the rest of the region.
I take it that the concept of a city integrated resort is not necessarily different from a destination resort casino, as you look at, or are they the same? Can they be the same thing? Don't always have to be, I suppose, but.
In my mind, there is some differences between.
And that's interesting. What's the difference?
You know, a city integrated resort, and you know, it's interesting. You know, we've spoken about with tremendous accolades about the MGM facility out in Springfield, and that I see that being a city integrated resort. It connects well within what was around it, has found connections to a lot of the different attractions, but yet is probably not a destination resort casino because it has a primary draw from the region. We have two projects here that are, you know, not in the same situation as MGM because there isn't a lot of built-up development around them. They're hoping to all be a spur for additional economic development, but that would be a quick down and dirty distinction.
No, that's really interesting. That's interesting. because the model that at least I took away from the Mohegan Sun response to this question was the large Harrah's Casino in New Orleans, which as I think about it, is not probably what I'd think of as a destination resort either, but is surely a city integrated resort. On the other hand, it seems to me that both of these applicants in their marketing approach are looking to bring in people to a destination that is different from, say, the Harrah's in New Orleans, in a different way. Maybe not, but I suppose we can just get hung up on definitions and not ever get to substance. Any more discussion on that? Well, is it? I see a consensus then to change the rating for Mohegan Sun in question 2 to very good. I see that correctly?
Yes.
All right. Let's go on to question 3. Outward looking, how do you propose to merge the creation of a destination resort, casino, or slots parlor with the concept of creating an outward-looking physical structure? That is, an establishment that relates to and is integrated with the host and surrounding communities, leverages Massachusetts' existing assets, and enhancing and coordinates with Massachusetts' existing tourism and other leisure venues. And I rated them both very good in this area, although they were very good in different ways. And this is largely, I think, a function of the sites. Mohegan Sun's approach to the outward look centers on its relationship with existing businesses and attractions rather than a physical openness. Again, the MGM is the sort of antithesis of both of these sites. It's embedded in the middle of the downtown area, and is open and encourages a lot of pedestrian walk-through and flow. Neither of these sites is really amenable to that. So they find an outward-looking nature in different ways, but it seems to me both are very good. The Wynn approach is in an area that you have to get to first, but once you get to it, there's several in and outs of the structure, and there are public spaces, and there are connections to the surrounding areas via the walk. And then I, in the presentation, mentioned the boat piece of this, in which you connected to the entire region as you were riding to the casino. So that was the basis for all of that. I don't propose to change either of those, but welcome comments or thoughts.
Agree with your assessment.
Everybody? All right. Then let's move on to Commissioner Zuniga for 4, 6, and that's it, right?
4 and 6, yes. Number 4 describes the competitive environment in which you anticipate to operate over the next 10 years, how you plan to succeed in the environment without taking revenues away from other Massachusetts gaming establishments, racetracks, or businesses. And when I presented this and looked at this question, I thought of it as having several layers potentially. One within Region A, one within the state, one within the broad region, and beyond. And the notion, the question here of competition is, I believe, has a couple of different aspects to it. The question does speak specifically to taking away revenues from other Massachusetts establishments, but I think it really alludes to the notion that the whole eastern seaboard in the United States is itself a competitive and getting competitive aspect. area. I did mention the marketing restriction when it came to Mohegan Sun in the narrative here. I do, however, think that with the product that Wynn proposes, building it, investing more, having a larger capital investment, having product differentiation and segmentation, his emphasis on the high end, and targeting the way they price their product and they build it would put them in an advantage when it came to Mohegan Sun. The fact that, again, this applicant is trying to go further away to get customers is perhaps underestimating some of the customers available here, in my opinion, builds on the decisions we've made before, and I did talk about the notion of building a portfolio. If we were building a portfolio, the decisions we've made in the past are with the slots parlor, that does target more the notion of convenience, the notion of close. There's, of course, no rooms there. With MGM, there is the way the structure, the region, the city lends itself for the drive, the drive from the region. It's well connected to main arteries, etc. And in my view, what Wynn proposes is trying to capitalize on people who would come here from far away a lot more than what Mohegan proposes.
How does that impact the competitive environment for 10 years, in your view?
Well, if we are Massachusetts, we're looking at it from how do we compete for all customers out there, whether they reside in Massachusetts, close by or far away. And if we have different product that targets different segments, the Commonwealth can be competitive with either in the form of recapturing dollars that are currently leaving, or attracting dollars that are not currently coming here. The notion, it's as if we were a consumer products company that had different market segments and try to get to all of the consumers out there. Many of them overlap, clearly. Many patrons will ultimately go to all of them, but if they are in different tranches of the market segment, we would appeal to more segments of the population out there.
So the idea that the Wynn proposal is clearly aimed almost exclusively at an upscale, highly upscale market is, in your view, a selection of a segment of both the local and international market that differentiates it from Mohegan Sun and makes it more durable?
Well, makes the whole casino industry in Massachusetts more durable, more sustainable. Wynn is not exclusively going after the high end, as you suggested. They are predicting that a significant portion of the revenues will still be from the regional market, which is very important. You'll remember from our assessment, the HLT market assessment, they were lower than our lower end, but it's still a big number. It's about 600 million that they expect to capture from the regional market. And the Mohegan, however, is over in the revenues from the regional market, from our assessment, and it becomes a question of what would you rather have? Somebody who may have overestimated what's available in the regional market, or underestimated what's available. This goes to another notion that I advanced, I believe, in my next, in this question as well, relative to the flexibility. I talk about that at the end of this question. The margins that I glean from the finance application are healthier with wind. We could get into that more if you want, but the amount of interest that the applicant pays over in Mohegan Sun has been modified slightly, by the way, with the new preferred equity, but not, in my view, significantly. I would have to kind of run the numbers. And a way to stay competitive for the facility is, nobody's going to get everything right. That goes for Penn, that goes for MGM. And their ability to react to the market threats, the market competitiveness, whether New Hampshire ever approves casinos, which is out there, or depending on what New York does relative to the areas that they are currently doing, is going to introduce factors in the competitive environment that applicants have to be able to react to. And this is a theme that cuts across the finance section. And if you have margins in your cost estimates, as well as your other costs, that would allow you to change certain things, you would be more flexible if you didn't anticipate everything in the market, and you had to change gears.
Yeah, well, I get that, but I guess I will come back to this, regardless of what we do with this criterion when we get to the projections. There's no question that Wynn has succeeded in a very competitive market in Las Vegas, and has been wildly successful in Macau, also a competitive market. But Mohegan Sun is and remains the largest grossing casino in the Northern Hemisphere, right? I mean, they've been pretty successful too, and that hasn't all come from Uncasville. So, I hear you on the interest differences. I hear you on the financial structure differences for this facility. But I just wonder whether the focus primarily on the high-end market is enough to give, over the long term, one applicant a competitive edge on the other, particularly when the other hasn't abandoned that market. It just is not, I don't want to diminish the emphasis that Wynn has on that, but the Mohegan Sun hasn't abandoned that section of the market. Anyway, any other questions or any other thoughts about this?
I think we'll get into this more as we explore
Sure.
all of these aspects, so I'll hold for those discussions.
Okay.
Bruce, do you have anything you want to add here?
No.
All right, is everybody content with leaving this one as it is?
Yes.
Okay, so let's move on. I've made my thoughts, regardless of how we come out here. I do want to revisit this as we go downstream. Okay, outside marketing. That's you too.
That's me. Collaborative marketing. How do you intend to market aggressively outside of Massachusetts and internationally, perhaps in cooperation of existing industries and organizations? This dovetails into the notions that I've already advanced. WIN has a lot of people dedicated nationally and internationally towards bringing people to their Vegas operation and Macau operation. They clearly are in their financials, their operations plan, their marketing plan clearly state these as a big part of their business model. They are silent when it comes to specific marketing efforts in terms of doing it jointly, but they're doing it themselves, in my view. So I would leave it at that.
I've read the Mohegan Sun as being a proposal as being really farther along than WIN was in, and more concrete in its marketing plans and its not its marketing plans, in its effort to work with affiliated entities, the Tourism Bureau, the Convention Center, other facilities in this region. And to be sure, WIN has all the attributes you said, but I thought that Mohegan Sun had more fully integrated its outreach and its focus into the attractions that were here, the marketing efforts that were here, the Greater Boston Visitors Bureau, and the like.
Well, it's one thing what they answer in the question.
Right.
That's certainly the case. I think the question was a little bit more direct, or there has an element of how do you plan to collaborate, and Mohegan does speak a lot about collaboration. I think the main goal of the question, in my view, is marketing aggressively outside of Massachusetts, and I think there is a real difference because they have the infrastructure. WIN has a big infrastructure dedicated to that. I know this is going to be a theme, but with what they're able to capture of the high end, that high end brings more dollars from because if they visit farther or they can most afford it, that brings in more dollars. So I see the difference between somebody trying to work together to get a customer from far away, while somebody saying, "Let me do it," and when they're here, the region will benefit.
All right, I hear you. Other comments? Commissioner?
Well, so what you're saying is they will do it on their own, they won't collaborate.
Well, not necessarily. I say they're silent. They're silent on how they responded on specifically organizations like MOTT or the Greater Boston's Convention Bureau, which is specifically mentioned.
But that's the question, right?
Yeah, well, it also includes marketing aggressively, which is the main thrust of the question.
Well, we read the question a little bit differently. I read it as looking not only for aggression, but collaboration. And that's, I think, the point that Commissioner Cameron was making.
No, it says perhaps in cooperation.
Yeah, and I was looking for an answer that
would
helped
answer
us
that.
with the perhaps piece.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I don't want to get into it. Bruce, do you have any, Commissioner Stebbins, do you have any thoughts on this?
Maybe I'm reading the question too pointedly also. I mean, we're talking about marketing aggressively outside Massachusetts and internationally. perhaps in cooperation with existing industries and organizations, and I think Mohegan tended to do better in that part of the questions in terms of identifying partners. Again, now we're somewhat crossing boundaries of replies and answers to other questions and how I'm looking at this. But there was certainly a collaborative approach, but I didn't necessarily see in this question that they were in their reply to this question driving a plan. Certainly, one of the things I had talked about is how well do you know the landscape from any number of various operating scenarios, and they certainly know who the partners are. It just, for me, tended to get, okay, we know you know who the partners are, we know who you want to work with, but then for me it just kind of stopped. But yet, we find other pieces of a more aggressive plan in other parts of the questions, and one of the questions I'm going to address later.
It stopped for which operator, for which applicant?
Again, in my viewpoint, from Mohegan, it talked about, yes, these are the people I want to work with, and not to put too fine a point on it, but they had the right names of the organizations, which was a big help in my mind. But there's knowing who my partners are going to be. There's also a question, I think, as Commissioner Zuniga pointed out, how much are you going to take charge? And then we'll partner with them in the goal of the partnering, but not too many specific strategies outlined beyond that.
So you're agreeing with this rating, I think is what you're saying.
I'd be comfortable with this rating.
And how did the WIN applicant cross that? How did the WIN applicant, in your view, do a better job on this question? I hear you on Mohegan Sun outlined the right names, and
Right.
but then they didn't stop and say how they implemented it, how they were going to implement it. And how, so, are you using, no, I'd just like to hear from Commissioner.
I mean, just on a cursory review of the question and the answer, they're identifying, again, maybe it's not all inclusive of some of the other existing industries or existing organizations, but they certainly focus on using a lot of tools they have, or identifying those tools. Maybe not being completely specific about, how they will use them, but with an overall goal of driving international visitation. Primarily, they talk about their marketing offices and other relations they have with, domestic sales and services workforce. And I talked about this. It was great that they talked about using them a little less specific in how they would actually be used. But to get to the collaborative question, or the question above, of how do you intend to market aggressively outside of Massachusetts and internationally, I just saw a degree of detail that drove a difference between the recommended rankings for both.
Let me add that there's, like many questions on the overview question, I think we need to glean information from all sections of the application, not just from the response to this section in particular.
Right. I don't disagree with that.
I remember well WIN's presentation relative to how do you get somebody from far away to come here, and there's a lot that has to do with building it better here to compete with what's elsewhere.
Yeah, I heard that.
And that theme does cut across
Right.
and is corroborated in what they are proposing in terms of the square footage per room, the product, etc. So I do take the notion that collaboration is maybe not WIN's strong suit, especially in this response, but we have to acknowledge that he's trying it on his own, and I believe, will do it aggressively. They will do it aggressively.
And so, certainly the tool, the 275 marketing employees, that's in many places in the world. And
That's right.
And the many domestic sales and service workforce that are driving
That's right.
influence in your rating.
That's right.
Yeah, I get that. Okay, any further discussion of this? I'm happy with this rating as it is. So by consensus, that one stays the same. Okay, that takes care of you, right?
That does. For the time being.
For the time being, I know. Now, Commissioner Cameron.
Okay, my question had to do with the Massachusetts brand. How does the project you propose manifest an appreciation for and collaboration with the existing Massachusetts brand, intellectual knowledge, economy, biomedical, life sciences, educational and financial services, economic driver, and our long history of innovation and economic regeneration over the 400 years of our existence? We didn't look at all the 400 years in this evaluation. Mohegan Sun, I rated them, sufficient, very good. The tribal culture, the traditional approach to develop a facility that is compatible with the region, it's consistent with New England's reserved cultural history. The culture and history has provided them with a deep understanding and knowledge of the region. The integration with community has influenced both the design features and the outreach efforts. Committed to the renewal of local historical institutions such as Suffolk Downs and Revere Beach. Their marketing approach reflects their emphasis on attracting a great percentage of customers from New England. Wynn and Everett, very different approach, but again, I thought it was sufficient, very good. A destination, Wynn proposes to add destination entertainment to the multifaceted Massachusetts brand. Wynn is committed to the restoration of a contaminated site and to renewing the connection of an underutilized industrial waterfront to public access. This approach aligns with Massachusetts' recent emphasis on recapturing the economic and recreational value of its historic harbor sites. The Wynn's marketing strategy to attract a higher percentage of international visitors to their facility is consistent with their worldwide reputation. So very different, but I thought both did a good job with this and have an understanding from a different perspective altogether on how their brand would in fact align.
Thoughts, questions? I have a question about how you see the Wynn approach advancing the Massachusetts brand.
Well,
And just to clarify the question,
Yeah.
as opposed to the Wynn brand.
Well, I did, when we talk about the recreational value, the historical harbor site, I thought that was an important piece to what Massachusetts is trying to do.
The harbor front was particularly important for you.
Yes, yes, well, I suppose it's a stretch when I talk about the contaminated site as being part of the brand, but I do see that whole revitalizing the waterway is an important piece and something that Massachusetts has an emphasis. And I looked at it from that perspective and thought it was very good from that perspective.
Consistent with a part of the Massachusetts brand being particularly in this area of Massachusetts, being water driven or water derived, which goes all the way back to colonial times. So this would be a piece of fitting in with that long-standing image, redeveloping a waterside site for energetic uses and rescuing it from the state in which it currently is.
That's,
Do I get that right?
yes, that's, lots of conversation around that with regard to the brand, the water taxis, that area being underutilized at this time. Thought that was an important piece and really did associate it with the brand from that perspective.
Sort of like a renewable notion, right? Regeneration. Is
Yeah.
that what
That's
you're
in the
trying
question, the regeneration part, yes.
to revitalization?
Right. Well, there's no question it does that, and the proposal does it well. Okay, I get it. Commissioner Stebbins, any thoughts that you have on that?
You know, it's such a broad question, and I think both applicants kind of really dug down into their answers and focused in on one specific piece. I mean, I would almost look at both of these applicants as meeting the brand of this economic regeneration. Mohegan talking about historic Revere Beach, the historic track. Wynn talking about, reclaiming economic regeneration of an old industrial site. So they kind of didn't really touch on all the other pieces of the brand and really focused in on one little particular niche of the brand as it was asked for in the question.
Yeah, which is why I thought that it was a split ranking, because neither of them focused on the totality of the question.
Yeah, well, that's interesting and helpful. I asked that question because I looked at the Wynn proposal really as a self-reflective proposal, one that advanced the Wynn brand exclusively. But I think you're right. I think that the harbor side, the waterfront piece, is really important, particularly in that region, where it could be a catalyst for further spreading of waterfront development. So I'm grateful for that, and so I'm comfortable with that. That rating that we have here. This obviously is the value of getting together and finally being able to talk about these things. Okay, Commissioner. Was that your only one?
It was, there
Yeah,
was the ninth
okay.
question, which really didn't lend itself to it.
That's right, that's right. Okay. Commissioner Stebbins, you have 5, 7, and 8.
Sure. And the second question, which I know we didn't ask the applicants about question 9, I'm sure at some point we'll be hearing from all of them about what would be essential to their success at some point in the future. My question, first question is question number 5, talking about meeting unmet needs. How do you propose to work with affiliated attractions and amenities to broaden the market base of the gaming facility and meet unmet needs in our array of entertainment, education, and leisure resources? Again, I ranked Mohegan Sun Revere as sufficient. They certainly talked about working with area attractions, working with the existing organizations in the array of entertainment. They talked about their partnership with City Center to both hold entertainment events at Mohegan Sun as well as at City Center, depending on the size of the crowd. They talked about their marketing relationship or relationship they hope to have with the Mass Convention Center Authority to promote convention and meeting activity. They talked a great deal in this question about a collaborative marketing initiative or creating or intend to build a collaborative marketing initiative similar to what they've organized down in Connecticut called Mystic Country. And again, talking about creating awareness of that region and hope to create a similar awareness of the region to draw people to the Revere and Boston area. And again, their plan to draw people to Revere and to communities further up along the North Shore. Wynn Everett focused on utilizing their kind of luxury-oriented destination, as they call it in the response, to complement a lot of what Boston and the rest of Massachusetts currently offer for tourists. They talked about strategic alliances with TD Bank Garden, relationships with Boston Symphony Orchestra, the Boston Harbor Association, Boston Harbor Alliance, Harbor Island Alliance, as well as a number of other target partnerships to benefit as in state and local tourism organizations as part of that partnership. They want to create partnerships with cultural, dining, historic, and entertainment attractions across the Commonwealth. I think that was one of the differences in that reply, was just thinking somewhat beyond the Boston area. If they're drawing somebody in for a longer period of a stay, getting them to actually explore just beyond the greater Boston region. They also talked about, and this is where I picked up the unmet needs in the array of entertainment, actually the unmet needs in our education resources. They talked specifically in this answer about partnering with Bunker Hill Community College to focus on a workforce training for their 5-star level of service training, something that they've done at Temple University. So I thought both respondents answered the question well. However, I felt because of some of the specifics and trying to check all the boxes within the question that I had to rank Wynn just slightly above Mohegan Sun Revere.
Okay, questions?
So with regard to Bunker Hill, you see that as additional training other than what you know, I know that Mohegan is certainly partnering with community colleges as well, but this is
Right.
something unique?
I looked at this and saw this as, you know, we asked both applicants and the other parts of the application to sign agreements with the Massachusetts Community College Training Institutes, and both parties have done that. Where again, I thought there was just a slight variation in responding to this question was when talking about the uniqueness of their, you know, their resort and their facility, and backstopping that or buttressing that with actually having a specific training program that they've done in other places, be at Bunker Hill, to train for this 5-star level of service. So it was a really detailed example of how they were hoping to meet an unmet need, which I'm not aware of other 5-star resort training programs in the area or in the region, and just thought it showed a little bit more initiative to offer that kind of difference in the rankings.
So this would be, well, did you understand that they had done this program at Temple, or that they had were aware of Temple and proposed to do something similar?
I believe they've done this program at Temple, and we're looking for to create a similar program at Bunker Hill.
Mm-hmm. And so this would up the reserve of people in the area capable of giving 5-star treatment, whether they were working at the Wynn facility or elsewhere.
Right.
All right. Commissioner Zuniga, any questions? All right.
Question number 7. This is diverse workforce and supplier base. Describe your commitment to a diverse workforce and supplier base and an inclusive approach to marketing, operations, training practices that will take advantage of the broad range of skills and experiences represented in our Commonwealth's evolving demographic profile. Further identify and discuss the diversity within the leadership and ownership of the applicant, if any. I'll go through my comments first, and then we can come back and talk about the rating. Mohegan Sun, in their reply to this question, stressed their current status as a minority-owned and operated facility, a diverse workforce. They've hit a target of 41% of their workforce being diverse, despite operating in regions that are less diverse than Boston. They talked about their Mohegan Sun, Massachusetts diversity plan, similar to a plan they created for their other facilities, and they will organize a diversity committee to oversee its implementation. Their host community and surrounding community agreements, they have focused on recruitment and hiring in local areas with a specific target of Spanish-speaking population. They have engaged the Greater New England Minority Supplier Development Council, the Boston Minority Business Development Center, and the Council of Corporate, and are on the corporate council of the Center for Women in Enterprise. They also expressed their support for the UMass Boston Commonwealth Compact Project. They have an inclusion policy. Again, this gets to their vending, talking about all contracts over 100,000 should include a bid from minority, women, or veteran-owned business, and developed a minority vendor list. The company mentioned their intent to work closely with our own Director Lacey going forward. Wynn demonstrated a track record in workforce. The Las Vegas operation comprised of a 60% diverse employees. Wynn identified diversity among its workforce, non-discrimination in all hiring practices as a core value. They also noted several areas of recognition that they've received for their diversity in management and leadership positions. In Massachusetts, they're planning to recreate a local recruitment partners effort in general recruitment materials and targeted marketing campaigns. They've also created training and development practices, including leadership training, so a number of positive internal employee career pathway programs. In addition, they've highlighted their diverse management leadership members, how they've supported some ancillary programs, including citizenship classes, and hosted a citizen swearing-in event. They've also pledged to work with our supplier diversity office. So, again, I think both of their responses were very strong. I would also suggest recognizing the level of detail they put into both and raising them both from sufficient to very good.
All right, comments on that proposal? It seems, I'll go ahead and comment. It seems to me that that's entirely appropriate. The workforce, the diversity that already exists is impressive for both applicants. You've delved clearly into the other components of that. You've been careful and thoughtful and detailed about this entire subject as we've gone along, and it's impressive in both cases. So I'd be happy to raise both.
Yeah.
And I think just to note, I think some of in talking with the WOW committee, they had expressed their interest in seeing these ranked as sufficient. I think most of their intention in doing that was based on this is a lot of good information laid out, it's a lot of good detail, but what's the follow-up, what's the monitoring? You know, who's going to keep track of their successful efforts? Obviously, that's part of our job, but I think that's where some of where the initial interest was in ranking it sufficient, but I'm happy to move both of them up.
All right, consensus to
I'd
do
be
that?
fine with that, yeah.
Okay, let's rate both of them very good. And then the final question for you, Commissioner Stebbins, is
Sure.
question 8.
Question number 8, which focuses on broadening the region's tourism appeal. What is your overall perspective and strategy for broadening the appeal of your region and the Commonwealth to travelers inside and outside of Massachusetts? Mohegan Sun, some of the detail I provided talks about focused, again, on drawing visitors to the region, encouraging them to explore Revere, the historic beach, and community and amenities along the North Shore, including Salem, Rockport, Gloucester, and Lynn, and others. They intend to use their existing 5 million member database for those marketing efforts. Again, we've talked about this, again, where they're projecting their visitation to come from. And again, the PKF study. They've also talked about increasing visitation. They want to partner with many of the organizations. They've responded here again to the organizations that they want to partner with. Also hoping to partner with the Mass Convention Center Authority to help, again, be part of an effort to draw conventions and meetings to Boston. In terms of highlighting other things to do in the area, they talk about a number of, in the response to this question, talk about a number of in-room promotions, dedicated tabs on their website, promotion of local attractions and businesses throughout the property, using their mailings, and again, they talked about their Momentum Rewards program for encouraging patrons to redeem points at these local businesses. Wynn Everett explained in their reply they see an opportunity to increase current entertainment and recreation spending as a percentage of the total visitor expenditure in Massachusetts. They highlighted the fact that 6% of the $16.9 billion spent in visitor expenditures is on entertainment and recreation. They noted that they feel that this number is considerably lower than other major cities across the United States. So they identified the problem. They focused on drawing an established existing customer base that, again, comprises higher income earners, people who want to tend to stay longer at their hotel, utilizing their national and international sales force to draw people, again, from outside the region and the country to the area. They talked about their strategy relying on creating partnerships. Again, they highlighted a number of specific cultural, dining, and historic and entertainment attractions in the Commonwealth. Want to utilize TD Bank Garden for their entertainment use, as well as build a relationship with the Boston Pops and their BSO to enhance their customers' stay. Wynn has a very specific program for giving points, non-gaming reward points in their interaction with the BSO and the BSO and the Boston Pops would allow those privileged award members to benefit from going to certain concerts and events. They also want to use their Red Card Room Key program or Wynn app to incentivize visits to other amenities, and they listed a number of those. And again, their projected marketing spending supports a number of these marketing initiatives. Again, I thought both applicants answered this question well, where I'd give a stronger scores to Wynn, and it was maybe with how they laid out the response, identifying what the opportunity was and how that opportunity could be met with some of the other initiatives and strategies that they talked about in the response to the question. They were pretty specific, pretty detailed, and again, they zeroed in on an opportunity they felt that the tourist economy in Massachusetts is missing out on. So that is the reason for a sufficient rating for Mohegan Sun and a very good to outstanding rating for Wynn Everett.
Does this question differ from the tourism question in your presentation? Because you rated them equally there with regard to tourism. So I
did. And probably I took this question as a standalone question. It was tough. I probably analyzed them a little bit differently, going on based on what they provided in the answers to these questions. I don't know about you, but I found some information. You know, we ask so many questions of our applicants in these questions that detail in a reply doesn't necessarily meet or is provided in a subsequent answer to a similar question.
But didn't we, I thought we were talking about looking at the overview as an all-encompassing, looking at, you know, all the answers that we have been provided to us through all the categories. Is that?
I looked at this as an answer to a specific question, and even though these are overview questions that you may think people could reply at a 30,000-foot level to, I think where I was impressed in these two responses was the specificity of detail and targeting a specific unmet need that, again, kind of pushed me to give a different ranking to both. Yes, even though they both in tourism probably are sufficient, and again,
So what's the kernel of the difference between, the momentum program can be used outside the facility in businesses, and they've now in their condition response targeted $17 million as an actual target, and we'll monitor that.
right.
They both have arrangements with local artistic venues. The Mohegan Sun has these plans to work with the various local travel bureaus. Wynn has the staff, the 275 people, and the various tourist agencies. What's the core of the difference between these two, particularly in light of the marketing response to the conditions given by Mohegan Sun in the response to the conditions? I guess I just wonder if you'd be amenable to upgrading a Mohegan Sun in light of particularly in light of the response to the conditions, to a level at least very good and maybe very good to outstanding. I think that the Wynn proposal, and we've focused a lot on the appeal to the high-end tourists from out of town and the dollars that those people will bring and spend here in Massachusetts. That's the plan, and I know we'll talk more about that when we get there and when we get to that section. But in terms of trying to get people here who aren't here, I wonder if Mohegan Sun's plan isn't at least very good. Because as I should just put a question mark right there and stop, but as I heard you, I was having trouble finding what the kernel of the difference was that made it that big a disparity.
Well, again, and you're right, there's certainly a big disparity between sufficient and a very good and outstanding rating. Again, I was more approaching this question as a standalone question, and again, that was a ranking provided before we understood or have been provided to us a change in the marketing conditions. The sufficient rating, there probably is more detail here. There probably is a larger strategy. Certainly, again, if I keep coming back to it in terms of understanding the local landscape, they certainly understand who their potential partners are. And they certainly understand an opportunity to work with the area hotels to add capacity when it comes to trying to lure conventions or meetings here in partnership with the MCCA. So again, for this, and maybe we can come back to it when if we revisit the tourism section or the tourism criterion, but I'm happy to bring Mohegan up to a very good, but again, in terms of answering these two questions, I just saw a more thoughtful, detailed target reply and how they plan to follow up and address that deficiency. Again, it's just what they see is a target of entertainment and recreation spending by visitors that's far below other municipalities or other major cities. So.
Can I let me just mention when the rating, if we're now comparing to the rating and the economic development piece that is on equal footing to the tourism rating,
Well, I wasn't, Commissioner.
Okay.
I was doing this as a standalone, as Commissioner Stebbins did.
Well,
And-
I
But I just wanted to make that clear.
Well, let me just pick up on that because you mentioned the marketing restriction. The marketing restriction, in my view, puts Mohegan on equal incentive to bring visitors from outside to either Massachusetts, or any one of the other facilities. Wynn does not have that imbalance, if you will, or that scenario. So they also project a lot more in their own revenues from out of state, and I guess I've made this point before. The further away and the more that they depend on outside revenues, the bigger the impact, in my view, on tourism dollars, because there will be presumably a trickle down, if you will.
Well, trickle down is tricky, but I hear what you're saying. But in terms of trying to attract people to the region, these plans, it strikes me on behalf of Mohegan Sun, are very good plans. And perhaps Wynn has the edge. We could revisit that later. Perhaps they do. They have this international infrastructure in place. There's no question about that. And I would, based on what I know and what's in the applications, give the nod to them on that piece. So that would, in this rating, bump them up a notch above Mohegan Sun. But Mohegan Sun now has amplified its plan, has removed and expanded its horizons in terms of the primary market for this facility, and now has also separated the primary non-Mohegan Sun equity investor from any interest in the Connecticut casino, all of which motivate success here. So it doesn't directly go to that, but it does, in my view, direct itself at some of your answers, your concerns, which I share. But it seems to me that you've got a basically very good tourism plan in place in Mohegan Sun and a little bit better plan in place in Wynn. That's all I was suggesting to
That's fine.
Commissioner Stebbins. I mean, is that
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. I mean,
okay?
what makes a very good and a very good outstanding?
Yeah, I know,
it's
I know,
always
I
it's
know,
always
I know.
tricky, right?
I know.
I think the way we've laid out this process has the real strength comes from the ability to compare one against the other.
Right.
So.
And I think we can spend probably, and I may be guilty of this, spend too much time looking at these individual components rather than at things holistically, but which we'll get to in a little while. But we did start down this path. It does have utility, and so I think we need to complete it. So that would, if we all agree, upgrade Mohegan Sun
Yeah.
from sufficient to very good in this category. Okay. So that finishes the individual ones. Now, do we have, Melissa, a slide that shows each of them? We do not. We do not have that for this one. Okay. Well, let's take then a crack at the overall rating. You can put up the slide with the blanks. In light of our discussions and now the revised ratings. Who wants to kick that off?
Well, do we want to get into detail here, or do we want to really just talk about which questions we think are important, or what do you think? I mean,
Why don't you, how would you like to begin?
Well, I mean, what I had put together here is I think some of these questions are more important than others
All right,
when it
why don't you
comes to
start
this.
there first, then? That's a
Yeah.
good conversation.
Yeah. I had questions 2, 4, 6, and 8 at a little more, I had a little more value to those particular questions when it comes to the overview rating. I just thought they, you know, talking about the legislative mandate for a destination resort, the competitive environment, the collaborative marketing, and broadening the region's tourism were really important factors in this overview. All of them are important, but I gave personally some more weight to those questions in the overview. And I think the scores, we just went through them individually, so we're pretty much aligned with how we valued those answers, you know. Does someone else want to speak, or I can give individual, I can come?
No, let's focus on, that was a useful thing, which I want to do for starters when we get to the overall discussions, and that's the weighting of these. Comments on the weighting of these, 2, 4, 6, and 8 as being more important than the others?
I agree. I think there's, you know, ultimately, and we will get into this discussion, I'm sure in the overall, but there is, in my view, the notion of creating this. Well, it's a stated goal of the legislation, which is a secure and robust gaming environment, which is one of the primary goals, and therefore the competitive aspect needs to be part of that. It's implicit throughout the whole Gaming Act that there's more economic development if it comes if there's a lot of repatriation of the dollars as well as outside. So tourism plays a big piece here. You had stated, Commissioner, 2, 4, 6, and which one else?
8,
8.
tourism appeal, broadening the
Yes, so I
regions.
spoke about that. 2 and 6, 4 and 6, as I mentioned, are, in my view, very, very much connected. One builds on the other, which builds itself on question number 2, the notion of the destination resort. So I would agree.
All right, Commissioner Stebbins?
You know, there's one that sticks out. Both applicants rated very well on it, but it's question number 7, which is really the standalone question when it comes to diversity, when it comes to the workforce, when it comes to impacting the local business base. So, where some of the other questions have some overlap into each other, and we've talked about those. You know, 7, I think, is certainly important. It's certainly something that repeatedly got restated throughout the statute.
So you would give 7 equal weight with the others?
Yes, I would.
Well, I can't disagree with I can't disagree with any of those. It is. I can't disagree with any of those. It's a broad rating. I'm not sure how much the weighting helps us, but there it is. They're all important questions, and that reflects the care, I guess, with which they were crafted. Okay.
Would it be fair to say that each of those there's an edge, however different, to win, and the roll-up could reflect that in the same way?
No, in 2, they're the same. Yes, there is an overall edge to win if we place primary weight on those. Actually, there's an overall edge to win if we include the other 2. So it seems to me that in this section, the overall overview score is and ought to be reflective of that. And if that's a consensus view, I'd propose a view of very good and very good / outstanding. Very good for Mohegan Sun, very good for outstanding for Wynn. That's a proffer, it's not an announcement.
Yeah, I think, again, trying to figure out whether very good outstanding is that much different from very good. I think the big picture is that the edge belongs, at least in my view, individually to Wynn, and in the roll-up it would reflect it. So I'm fine with the overall roll-up as you suggested.
My proposal is based on something a little more than the edge. I think that Wynn does have the edge here. I think we've talked about this now for almost an hour and a half, and I think it's pretty clear that, and what our reasons are for giving Wynn the edge here. But I think it's really important to understand too that we have 2 good proposals here. Mm-hmm. We don't have one in which there is a vast gulf between one and the other. And I think that, therefore, the rating that the overall, and these are not scores. These are, there's not a number of points that go with dark green and a few less that go with the light green. We've never done that, and that's not what's here. And I think it's very important to give a response that reflects the reality. And I think the reality is that in this area we have 2 very competitive proposals, and it's from that standpoint that I recommended a very good / very good outstanding recommendation for this.
Yeah, I would agree. It's the overview, and it's all-encompassing, and they are, which is why this is very difficult. They are both equally strong well, I won't say equally. They're strong proposals that we have to choose from. So, yeah, I agree with that rating.
Okay. Commissioner Stebbins?
I would agree with that.
All right. I don't think we need a vote then. I think by consensus, we rate the Mohegan Sun Revere proposal very good, and rate for the overview section the Wynn Everett proposal very good to outstanding. All right. That brings us to the end of this particular piece, and it also brings us to lunch. So we're going to stop now, and we will resume in 1 hour at 2 o'clock right here.